what's up, guys? How's it going? I'm doing a special nighttime video. So, I was just thinking that for me, what kind of led me to not believe in Christianity anymore was a number of different things. Obviously, the journey that I've been on, I've shared with you all, and it's been through the books that I've read, the debates I've listened to, just this information out there by the skeptics and some atheists that really call into question, what a lot of Christians believe. But at some point, I have to sift all this information and pull it in and say, okay, this all means what? Does it mean that Christianity is more or less likely true? And at one point in my life, I was willing to believe that it was true. But of course, I was in a knowledge deficit at that time, and I didn't understand the things that I understand now. So, Christians have to make that same assessment. And like I did. Of course, I based it upon the available information I had at the time. Now I have contradictory information or conflicting information that really calls into question the validity of Christians' claims. Now, I understand many people still hold true to their faith because they believe it's true. And at some point, they had to sift the information too and say, this is most likely true because of X, Y, and Z. And, who knows what those reasons were. But there was the same evidence, or alleged evidence, that I looked at, many Christians look at, and yet we deduce a different answer. We come up with a different conclusion. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about Christian logic and, what is the rationale that they use. And I'm sure there's sort of a, and this, I'm going to give an example here in a second. There's this sort of like pseudo-intellectual type of Christian intellectual argument that says something like, here's an example, that, obviously the gospel writers were writing about something, and so obviously this must have actually happened because, they were writing. Why else would these people, or, why was Paul writing his epistles, if this stuff wasn't true? But it's like saying, and I think it was Dr. Bob Price had said this, that, using that as what the argument I just gave you, an example, is like saying, the yellow brick road must lead somewhere. It's a freaking story. It's a movie. It's not, you know what I'm saying? So the same thing can be flipped back around and say, okay, you're saying that the gospel writers wrote this stuff and allegedly accounted for the life of a man named Jesus, but what if it's just a story? And why are we compelled, we aren't, to believe it's anything other than that? So that's kind of like where I was going with this, is that I get that Christian. I was having a conversation recently with a buddy of mine, a good friend, and because he's still of the faith, and I'm not. So he asked me often, what was the reason? What was the one thing? And because many of the reasons that Christians think of for someone's unbelief is they're in rebellion, or they're angry with God because there's some perceived injustice that God has done to their life, and that has nothing to do with it. In the opening remarks, I stated basically this has come to fruition. This has come about as a result of this journey, this undertaking that I went on, because I believed that I didn't have the truth to begin with. So if you don't think you have the truth to begin with, then you go looking for some kind of explanation for, why don't the Jews believe that Jesus was the Messiah? Well, there's all these basic elementary presuppositions, if you will, I guess, premises that I in my mind I established and said, well, if this is true, then how can that, and so if God exists, you just take that for an example, that means he's responsible for all the good and he's responsible for all the bad. Oh, no. The way Christians sidestep this is by going into, the devil has dominion over this world, and this is his world, and so someday God's going to banish him to hell forever. Well, why would he even allow him to have reign? See, it's this domino effect. You start looking at one thing, and there's all these other little. It's like a deck of house of cards. You pull one out, and that's what for me to Christianity is it begins to collapse, and you can't prop yourself up like many Christians do. So yeah, they look at things and they think they have some type of intellectual argument that says, well, we don't just believe it because of the way it makes us feel. We believe it because, see, it's a historical document passed down through the generation. But it's not. It's not. If the skeptics and atheists like Bob Price and and Richard Carrier and other, if they can present a compelling argument that seems to have merit and seems to hold, then I think the person that says, oh no, in this one instance, Jesus of Nazareth was the true Messiah. I mean, and how many other people have come since that time claiming to be that, you know? And it's just crazy, man. There's no way this stuff is true. And now as we're approaching the holiday seasons, I begin to think about this a little bit more. And there's some videos I want to share that I came across about some like myths that exist about, you know, Jesus being from Bethlehem, or, you know, or was born in Bethlehem, or whatever the heck it was, you know, just how all this stuff is disproved. And because I know it's probably never disproved enough for the Christian who wants to believe it hook, line, and sinker. You know, they don't want to be wrong. I don't want to be wrong. Nobody wants to be wrong. But I'm willing to, I'm willing to be wrong if I can be proven wrong. And because they'll say, well, yeah, many people, how do you explain this and how do you explain that? And well, life is full of all kinds of unexplained things, but it doesn't mean that the answer points to God. That's only because it has to, because you're in a jam. You've got yourself in a tight spot, and the only way to get out of it is to say, oh, well, you know, we can't begin to understand the things of God because, you know, our mere mortal minds, you know, these things are God's ways are higher than our ways. I mean, it's like crap like that. It's like, really? The only way is to disparage us and our humanity, us as human beings, because we refuse to believe in this malarkey, because we fail to believe in enchanted kingdoms and fables and fairy tales and things that we don't see in the real world and probably never have. And yet when skeptics can go through line after line after line and show just how this is a crock of shit. I mean, I don't mean to be offensive to anybody that's of faith, but it's, you know, that's what I really strongly believe at this point in my life that we're dealing with, because that's what best explains the evidence that we see. Now, I know William Lane Craig and those types, Gary Habermas, and who the heck was the other one that wrote the Purpose? Rick Warren and some of the others, you know, they'll have other ways of explaining the evidence and explaining it away because they need to. Because they're the ones that are out there being the one that says, oh, no, it's true. When the rest of us are going, no, I don't think so. You know, and so prove to me, show me, because you're the one that's making the assertion. And if you can't come up with a sound method, you know, a sound argument, sometimes it does sound like an argument, but it's a sound argument, but it's not, then, you know, then you're the one bringing forth this and saying, in this one instance, you know, Christianity is true and all the other religions in the world are not. I'm not doing that. So you have the obligation, the onus is on you to prove how to try to explain, and they do. They try to explain away, you know, these inconsistencies, incongruencies that exist with, you know, with the nature of God and just with issues in the Bible, and they want to deny and honest Christians. I think not all Christians are this way. There's some honest ones out there that will acknowledge the contradictions do exist, and there are some significant problems. And they say, yeah, I've noticed that too as well. But you know, other Christians, maybe fundamentalist Christians, will not acknowledge that. They'll believe in biblical inerrancy, that there are no errors in the Bible, there are no mistakes. God is a perfect and triune being, and it's like, no, the Old Testament didn't preach that God existed in anything other than the singular. He wasn't preached and taught to the Israelites as a plural being that existed as the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. That didn't exist. So if that's how God really was, why wasn't it preached? You know, so it's stuff like that I'm talking about, that you look at the Bible and you're like, who wrote this stuff? Man wrote it. And it's void of any knowledge, because they didn't have the knowledge at the time, because apparently God didn't bestow that and impart any scientific knowledge to them, because, no, I mean, he could have. We say, well, they wouldn't have understood it back then, because, yeah, we can, all day long, we can come up with these ways of backpedaling and sidestepping the issues that exist, but they're there, and Christians don't like it. They don't like it because they want their pet religion, they want their pet faith, you know, the thing that's true to them to be true. And many Christians don't come to Christianity, and this is kind of what I was thinking in the opening remarks, they don't come to Christianity by some intellectual journey. No, they approach Christianity through some emotional response, and, oh, I'm a low sinner, and oh, me, and I need to be saved. And it's an emotional response that brings most people to Christianity, not an intellectual journey or search. And so that's what I was trying to say through this video, is that Christians may have this pseudo, you know, intellectual kind of pretending that they're, they've come to faith and belief in faith in Christ, and that this is a true story under some premise that there's actually some kind of intellectual arguments. But I think the arguments, like they said, the gospel writers must have been writing about something, and so because, they were writing a story. The Yellow Brick Road doesn't lead anywhere. It's just a story. You can't use that as an argument to say it's really true. Do you see what I'm saying? So, anyways, I'll conclude. It's been a long video. I don't want to talk anymore, but I did want to communicate these ideas to you all. Appreciate all your support. Thanks for checking out my videos, and I'll be sure to post again soon, and we'll see you then. Take care.